We need to talk about salt. Yeah, salt. The thing the American Medical Association says is killing us through strokes, heart disease, high blood pressure, and more. The only way to fix this problem is to cut back. Way back. Hold on a minute. That seems like a script from another channel. This channel's about cities. Let's try it again. We need to talk about salt. It's costing us money, it's destroying our cities, and it's destroying the environment around us. We can change that though, so let's dive in. On this channel, we talk about the rapid evolution of our cities, thanks to new mobility trends, electrification, the affordability crisis, and more. If you're a fan of cities, like this video and subscribe to ensure you don't miss any updates. Before I slander salt too much, I want to be unequivocally clear that, used in the right amounts, salt does a great job of melting ice in most weather conditions. There's no doubt that it eliminates millions of trips to the emergency room every year and makes us better off for it. What we'll talk about in this video is that we use so much salt that it is costing us money, it's destroying our roads, destroying our bridges, destroying everything in our cities, and in addition, it's killing the wildlife. But like I said, if used correctly, salt is a great tool for eliminating ice. So watch till the end of the video where I'll show some new ways that cities are using less salt to get the job done in an environmentally conscious way. The Toronto Region Conservation Authority has found that in some cases, we are using 100 times more salt than required to get the job done. A University of Toronto study found that 90% of the region's waterways are so polluted with salt, even long after the winter storms have passed, that it's toxic to fish life. That same study found numerous examples across the region where water was still toxic in the middle of summer. In New York, the Lake George Association called salt the acid rain of our times. One of the issues with salt in freshwater bodies is that it accumulates. There's just not enough flushing of the lakes and rivers each year to get all of the salt that we're putting in out into the oceans again. Over time, this leads to levels of salt exposure so high that they may never recover. There are examples of cities around North America where they've had so much salt in their water that it's affected the quality of their drinking water. Merrimack, New Hampshire had to permanently cease the use of one of their wells because of salt exposure. The region of Kitchener-Waterloo says that after big winter storms, you can taste the salt in their drinking water. The only way to prevent disaster is to cut back. The right amount of salt applied in the right places will melt the ice with little to no runoff, keeping our infrastructure and our ecosystems in a good state. Instead, we're just using so much that it's destroying the world around us. In 2015, an NBC News report showed that salt can cripple municipal budgets. That year was particularly stormy in the northeast of the United States and Canada. Cities had used up their salt supplies and had to go back and purchase more on the open market. They were buying salt at double, triple, or even quadruple the going rate that they pay in the summer. Cities were forced to pay whatever they could to get the salt they needed to keep their roads open, and this had consequences for the rest of the budget year. Even without shocks like 2015, salt is expensive, ringing in at about $75 a ton. That may not sound like a lot, but Americans use 22 million tons of road salt every year, adding up to about $2 billion. Clearly, even a small cutback in our salt use will have a big impact on our budgets. Despite that, the amount of money we spend on salt is a drop in the bucket compared to the costs of the damage that salt causes to our cities. All of that extra salt is corroding our roads, our bridges, our water pipes, our sewers, and more. Clear Roads, a research organization led by the Minnesota Department of Transportation, estimates that excess salt causes $8 billion in damage to highway bridges across the United States every year. That extra salt that's left behind after the ice has been melted leaks into the bridge structure and corrodes the steel that keeps them standing. The US EPA also estimates that $20 billion in damage is caused to our roads, bridges, and even cars due to the excess salt that we use every single year. This is 10 times the cost of what we pay for the salt itself. While there are no reliable estimates of the cost of salt for private property damage, we know that they will have similar issues to our public roads and highways. Some examples of where costs go up for the private sector include having to coat parking garages in epoxy to keep the salt out of the subsurface, the cost of door frames that rust out, more cleaning of rugs on the inside of the building, more replacement of those rugs, destruction of shoes and boots, I think it's safe to say that across North America, salt costs us hundreds of billions of dollars every year. Cutting back on salt use provides an immediate saving to whoever is spreading the salt, in addition to a long-term saving to the public for the cost of the infrastructure that we build. As indicated earlier, the extreme use of salt has devastating effects on wildlife. A few years ago, researchers in Toronto found saltwater blue crabs thriving in Lake Ontario, which is supposed to be made of fresh water. If those blue crabs are thriving, what does that mean for species that are supposed to have clean, fresh water available to them? Obviously, this toxic concentration of salt is literally killing fish. The World Wildlife Fund has found countless examples across Canada where salt runoff has killed fish, made eggs inviable, and threatened even land-based wildlife populations. This is a graph they made showing the rapid rise in salt in Mississauga's Cooksville Creek after a winter storm on December 9th. The scariest part of this to me is that the salt concentration almost never falls below the pink range, which is when the salt concentration begins to exceed federal limits. There are countless examples across North America where the baseline salt concentration is now 4 to 5 times the level where it begins to harm plankton, the base of the food chain. This reduces the food available for animals higher up in the food chain, but it can also harm those animals directly too, just like how you and I are harmed if we sprinkle too much salt on our French fries. The evidence connecting the decline in salmon populations to salt is incredibly clear. There are, of course, other factors that impact the viability of salmon populations, but we know how to reduce salt use right now. The good news is that it doesn't have to be this way. The excess use of salt is largely a North American problem, and even then, it's the worst on the east coast of North America. There are examples from around the world of how to do this a different way and still be safe. In fact, we don't even have to look to the rest of the world. The NBC report I mentioned earlier showed plenty of examples within North America where cities are taking the lead and dramatically cutting back on their salt use. One example they cited was from the perfectly named East Fishkill, New York. That town invested $140,000 to upgrade and retrofit their salt trucks to spread salt more efficiently. That saved them almost $250,000 in that first season, a very quick payback that will have long-term dividends for the taxpayers in that town. Frankly, just like with diet and alcohol consumption, the best thing to start with is to just use less. Some jurisdictions have played around with wacky-sounding ideas like beet juice, cucumber juice, molasses, and of course in Wisconsin they used cheese brine, but the consensus is that the best solution is to just use less salt. Oh yeah, a solution. It turns out the best thing to do with salt is a solution. Salt users across North America are increasingly turning to a mixture of salt and water called brine. This solution can then be sprayed on our roads, bridges, sidewalks, and bike lanes to keep ice from sticking. There are many advantages to pre-mixing brine. Most importantly, the controlled conditions of a warehouse allow you to get the concentration of salt just right. The brine sticks to the road, unlike rock salt that hits the road and bounces off, going directly into our rivers and streams before it can do anything about the ice. It can be applied ahead of a storm to prevent ice from forming on the road surface. Anyone who has used a bike lane or a sidewalk in winter knows that the salt doesn't do a great job of melting the ice. It turns out that brine solves this problem too, efficiently melting the ice and making it safer to ride a bike all year round. As shown in that example from East Fishkill, New York, brine is cheaper than rock salt, even when you factor in the extra equipment that you need to get the job done. The main downside of using brine is of course that last point. You need to invest upfront in the equipment to make, store, and spray the brine, unlike the simple hoppers and scoops that we can use to spread rock salt today. For small private contractors, it may not feel like it's worth the investment to get all of this extra equipment. In some areas, what we're seeing is that salt vendors are starting to make the brine for those customers and then selling it to them pre-made, so the required investment is a lot lower. The long-term savings associated with brine are crystal clear, and in a single bad snowstorm season, the equipment can pay for itself. Now, if you're watching this from home, you're probably thinking it's overkill to make your own brine solution, find a sprayer, and do all that stuff to get salt onto your driveway and melt that ice so you can go to work in the morning. The good news is there's a low-tech solution that will work just fine for you. For every square meter of surface, or for you Americans, 10 square feet, You only need about 58 grams or 2 tablespoons of salt to get the job done. Now, you may be thinking that I'm just some random guy on YouTube making stuff up for views, but I have some sources. The Ottawa Riverkeeper says you only need a coffee cup full of salt for a 2-car driveway. You just need to spread it evenly to make sure it gets the job done. There are many certification bodies around North America that contractors can use to reduce their salt use, like the Smart About Salt Council in Southern Ontario, or New Hampshire's Green Snow Pro certification, which the state says can shield contractors from certain liability if they follow the program's directives. Overuse of salt is a solvable problem, one that we can start working toward today. Have you seen examples of too much salt use in your area? If so, look up the name of your local certification body and post it in the comments so others can find out too. Don't stop there. Share it with whoever spreads salt at your apartment building, your office, or your favorite place to shop. They'll be glad to save money by using less salt. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe by clicking the bell on the bottom right. Thanks for watching.